Sometimes history is a way of finding you when you least expect it. For Alister Constantine, known to his fellow soldiers as Connie, that moment came through a WhatsApp group chat. A friend sent him the newly announced Airfix Ferret Scout Car kit, complete with its box art. At first he dismissed it as just another release, but then he noticed the number plate, 00EC15. It stopped him in his tracks. This wasn't just any ferret, it was his ferret, the very vehicle he had driven during the Gulf War. In this interview, Alister shares the remarkable story of 00EC15 through some fantastic photographs he managed to capture at the time. From its battered state when he first took command, through its role as a liaison, reconnaissance and support vehicle in Saudi Arabia, Iraq and Kuwait, right up to the moment it roared down the Basra Highway. This is a first-hand account of life inside the Ferret, and the memories behind the machine immortalised on the Airfix box art. Firstly, we ask Alister how he found out that 00EC15, his Ferret, was on the Airfix box front.
I'm part of a WhatsApp group for ex-soldiers, and I was part of 55, the Residency Field Battery, Royal Artillery, and we've had a sort of a group of ex-soldiers together. And I had a notification that came through, and Sean Besson, one of my friends, he said, "Oh, Connie," because I was referred to as Connie. "Connie, there's a Ferret that they've just released, so it's going to be released, the Mark 1-2. And I thought, no, it'll be the old one because they've already released the Mark 2-3, so they're not going to produce a Mark 1-2. And then he sent the image through, and I sort of looked at my phone, opened it up. It's like 00EC15. That just rings a bell. So I went scurrying away and looked at my photographs, and then lo and behold, I looked at the pictures, and it was the very same registration plate and markings that the Ferret I used in the Gulf. So it's a big surprise. We'd seen the Gulf situation flaring up, and I think it kicked off in the August of 1990. Lots of sort of footage on the television of the Americans being deployed, and then there was an announcement that units from the British units will be going out to the Gulf. The infantry unit would be 1st Stafford's Regiment. So I was actually part of 49 Field Regiment, and we got called out on a Sunday morning. We were all called out on sort of a parade, which is a big surprise for a Sunday. And then we were asked to indicate who were trained signallers, but also who were trained observation post assistants. So obviously I was in that category. And then we were said, right, okay, well, 40 Field Regiment based up in Hona are going to be deployed to support 1st Staffordshire Regiment, so the Stafford. So they needed to make up the numbers. So effectively we were going to be transferred from our parent unit to support 40 Field Regiment. So the following week we arrived at 40 Field Regiment, and then I was assigned to 129 Battery, and then interviewed by an officer, and then basically the officer was saying, all right, what skills do you have? And then I was then hooked up with an OP crew, and there were a couple of us, and essentially the 129 Battery crew that I was with was made up of some blokes from 45 Regiment as well. So it was a bit of a mismatched crew. They were operating a 432 armoured personnel carrier as an OP vehicle, and then I was assigned to run the Ferret. The Ferret Scout Car. So essentially you'd have the 432 in the middle of the battle group, and then you'd have the Ferret on the side of the battle group, but also used for liaison work. Now 40 Field Regiment, I don't know what they'd been up to, but they'd been off camp for quite some time, so they hadn't used the Ferret Scout Car at those locations for a long time. So I essentially, we looked at the Ferret and thought, blimey, this is a bit of a wreck. So they were in pretty, to be fair, they were in pretty poor condition because they hadn't been used. The one that I had, 00EC15, as an example, I had one of the smoke discharger tubes just snapped off it. When I looked inside the vehicle, in comparison to the 49 Field Regiment Ferrets, that half the boxes were missing. So all the radio harnesses weren't there, and they're a bit poor. So the first few days with the crew was actually going around trying to gather as many bits as I could, knowing that this vehicle was going to be in theatre. So there was obviously a shortage of parts as well, so it was a bit cheeky, but we found ourselves doing sort of sneaky beaky trips into other batteries' gun bays and basically pinching parts off other vehicles to service that vehicle. We did an awful lot of training at in Hona with 129 battery. So we'd be out on the ranges, and then we'd be providing fire support, including use of the Ferret for some of the warrior armour personnel vehicles firing their Radan cannons. So we did a lot of training, a lot of familiarisation with the Iraqi army and some of the vehicles. So as OPs, effectively we needed to know all the different vehicle types in case we faced them and we could bring down some artillery fire. So then we flew out to Saudi. We landed at Daman, and then we were initially posted at a place called Camp 4, which was like a worker camp for oil refineries or whatever they were doing out at Al Jubail. We took the camp over for a few weeks, and then we were essentially doing some training and then waiting for the vehicles to turn up. Then we went down to the docks, and we worked with the US Marine Corps down at the docks, sort of doing training. So initially our battle group was actually aligned with the US Marine Corps, which was very, very, very interesting. So the vehicles turned up, so ships turned up at the Al Jubail port, and then we were instructed to go and pull the vehicles off the boats. Of course, 00 EC-15 was pulled off the boat. And then we had this period of time initially at the dock with the vehicles parked up, where we would do lots of sort of titivating of the vehicles. So we painted the registration plates. So a lot of time killing there. When the vehicles were up to scratch, some of our initial tasks were to go out into the desert, and by this time the M109 A2 field guns hadn't self-propelled guns hadn't turned up. So what we did was we went out into the desert to survey some future gun positions in readiness. So the role of the Ferret, it changed through being out in, from the initially out in Saudi Arabia, then going into Iraq, and then moving around into Kuwait. So it changed along route. So initially we heavily used the vehicle as a liaison vehicle. So so for example, when the forward observation officer needed to go to an O group, the vehicle would be used to go and sort of run, basically the run around vehicle for the crew and for the forward observation officer. Then as time went on and we spent longer periods of time out in the desert, there were periods of R&R so we would actually use the Ferret to ferry soldiers back to Camp 4, so you could have a shower, have a bit of a night off before you get carted back into the desert. And that happened maybe every month. You got an opportunity to go back and just freshen up a little bit. But it was extremely useful as sort of a run-around vehicle for liaison. So as time went on, things started to heat up. We then got moved further north. So initially we sort of drove north, and then we got loaded up by I think Bedford TM vehicles would cart the Ferrets up further, and we were essentially working alongside the tanks. And by this time further units had arrived from the UK, and we were no longer housed alongside the US Marine Corps. We were sort of our own fighting unit. Then as we moved further north and the air war kicked off, then we needed to, obviously the situation changed heavily, and the role kicked in where we were essentially digging shell scrapes, being positioned in the shell scrape, and then observing the front. So it would be two of us in a crew. So the warrior would be off doing its own thing at the centre of the battle group, and then essentially we would be housed in a position. I think there was one time we were sort of left in a position sort of one to 2 weeks, just essentially observing the front, and of course we were in radio communication back to the warrior vehicle. On that vehicle as well, you had all the compo, so you had plenty of rations with you, and the units that we were aligned with. So initially we were obviously it was the Staffordshire Regiment, 1st Staffordshire Regiment, but we were with A Company, and each Ferret crew, which could be from 129 battery and some of the other batteries, are basically split out amongst the different companies of the Staffordshire Regiment. And then So we spent quite a bit of time just doing observation work and then carrying on ferrying people around. By this time, there were no sort of fancy trips back to Camp 4, and it was all mainly moving between different units for O groups and so forth. But the vehicle, the Ferret, was heavily aligned with the Warrior, so we just sort of worked in tandem. So as time moved on and the ground war kicked off, so we had some situations where we would essentially, the British units are moving forward, rounding up prisoners, and the Ferret was used to as support to transfer the prisoners back from the front and into pens. So we basically provided support because we'd got this Gympie on and we were an armoured vehicle, so we were able to provide cover for some of the Iraqi troops being moved back into compounds. We did have some situations as well. So for example, there was one particular time we'd managed to pick up an Iraqi, surrendered to us. So we searched him, shoved him on the back of the vehicle, and then we were driving back at some point, and then we came across an Iraqi infantry section, just sort of obviously armed with AK-47s, and we decided, right, okay, well, we've got to tackle these people here. But what we managed to do was the Iraqi that we had trundling around on the back of us, he basically communicated with the Iraqis that were in front, legged it forward and convinced them to surrender. So we did have quite an amusing experience with rounding up this infantry section of Iraqis. And of course, there's a bit of booty there, so it's the sort of the first introduction as well then that you managed to get your own AK-47 to play around with, which was quite good fun. But yeah, so it essentially providing support from the infantry and tank units to, once we'd rounded prison helps, just bring them back to the compounds. When we first arrived in Saudi, we went out into the desert, and the sand was just extremely soft. And if you look back in the 60s and when the British were out in places like Aden, they had special sand tyres, great big sand tyres that distributed the weight far better than the Dunlop 16 by 900. So the problems that we had was the vehicles bogging in all the time. So mounted on the front of the Ferret, we had 2 pieces of PSP. So we would regularly remove those, wedge them underneath the tyres, and then also with the shovel that was on the front of the Ferret, we would regularly dig the vehicle out to get out of sticky spots. But as the vehicle or as the situation moved on, we moved further north towards the Iraqi border. The ground conditions drastically improved. You know, the ground was a lot harder. You had the ability to be able to dig trenches. So also the ground was very, very flat and less sort of undulating like in Saudi. So it was a lot better. So when we first arrived in Saudi, we had the MT sergeant walked around and he looked at the Ferret, and I think he was a bit of a tyre kicker, and he looked around the Ferret and he pointed to one of the tyres and just said, "Oh, we need to change that." So we had this new tyre turn up, took the tyre off, and of course I've got the knowledge now, but then had no idea. But basically we undid all of the nuts holding the two halves of the wheel together, which in fact is extremely dangerous. So we swapped over this tyre, put it all back together, put it on the Ferret, and then not long after we found a situation with the bevel box going bang. So we'd lost 4-wheel drive, and an even worse situation with bogging the Ferret in. So to determine that we'd actually got a problem with the bevel box on the wheel station, is we had a Foden lorry came in. Using the jib of the Foden, we chained it up and we lifted the Ferret, and then by turning the wheels we could tell that we'd lost 4-wheel drive to one of the sides of the Ferret. So of course, still stuck out in the middle of the desert, and they were an absolutely fantastic team. So when the replacement bevel box turned up, We had some REME engineers that came in, and we basically pack lift, took the whole engine out, the gearbox out, petrol tank out of the Ferret, and replaced one of the rear bevel boxes. So that was quite challenging, and hats off to the REME team to be able to do that. I think we had a little 9x9 tent there that was set up, and then just a big tarpaulin for the Ferret to sit on, but it was extremely well done. So from that was our major problem that we had with the Ferret in service. And of course the sand conditions improving going further north was really, really good. So you just, as working on the vehicle, you would just make sure that it's maintained. So you would check all the oils or lubricants periodically. And also fuel, keeping an eye on the fuel consumption was really important. I did have a situation where it was like, I can't believe this is happening, where we actually ran out of fuel in the middle of the desert, and we looked around 360 and not a soul in sight. So me and my mate were just a little bit head scratching, thinking, oh dear, we're in trouble here. But fortunately on the horizon we saw this sort of Land Rover turn and come towards us, fortunately, and absolutely brilliant blokes. Took the carburettor apart, undid it all, got a compo tin full of petrol, poured a bit of petrol in the carburettor, got a jerry can of fuel, and really got us out of trouble. So that was really beneficial. So as we moved further north, we had the air war, and then we had the ground war that took place. Once the ceasefire had kicked in, we parked up. So we basically parked up next to the Basra Highway. So we drove down the Basra Highway, and then we parked up with the Staffers, 1st Staffers Regiment. So we parked up there, and then we had a whole period of time then just to take stock of what had just happened. But also it was an opportunity, as many ex-soldiers will know, there's a term booty. So it was an opportunity to go and have a bit of a rummage around all the Iraqi kit. So we used the Ferret quite regularly to drive down the Basra Highway, and to be fair, a lot of it was a terrible mess. But it was an opportunity to look in some of the Iraqi tanks and look at some of the opposition equipment. And we picked up a few bits and pieces. So our crew, our OP crew, so for example, one of the bombardiers picked up a nice set of infrared binoculars. We all seem to have AK-47s as well, so we could do the old firing a few rounds in the air. And then also what I managed to recover is we got some maps. So I've got a nice Iraqi map where they were dished out, a big bundle of them. And then some of the obscure things, I've still got a couple of packets of Iraqi cigarettes. So it was quite an interesting time. So a long period of time just waiting for, waiting with the unit essentially to give the go-ahead to get taken out of theatre. So the Ferret, by that time, it had done some miles, and it was in sort of slightly, I'd say, poorish condition through just wear and tear. And the final day in which we left theatre, we parked the vehicles up, and the manifold broke. So my final memory of driving that Ferret was like driving a racing car, because there was no manifold on the Ferret. So the old Rolls-Royce B60 was purring away and making an incredible noise. The Ferret, in it, sort of when we were attached to the US Marine Corps, the Americans absolutely loved the Ferret. And of course, Saudi Arabian roads were just amazingly straight and in good condition. So often we'd be returning to Camp 4, bombing down the motorway, and of course you'd see a whole line of Humvees, and we would just whiz past the Humvees. And on a couple of occasions we had Humvees trying to catch up with us, but the Ferret was governed to 60, and in certain situations you could get a lot faster. I know as well that there were situations where people would take the governor out, and then you could get out up to, I mean, I've never done it, but you could get up to 80 miles an hour out of a Ferret. But quite a lot of jaw-dropping moments from Americans looking at the Ferret whizzing past. I did have a situation once as well when me and my mate were whizzing down one of the Saudi Arabian roads, and it was at night. We were absolutely flying, and all I could see, I was driving it, all I could see were these sort of headlamps creeping just alongside me. and then the chap then told us to pull over, you know, let's get off the side. So we pulled over, and then I got a right rollicking from again, I think again he was another sergeant major, gave me a bit of a ticking off for speeding down one of these Saudi Arabian roads. But they were extremely good fun to drive, you know, and you know, that little bit of freedom made it even nicer.